Hi, I'm James Nelson, Vice Chairman of Cushman & Wakefield, and I'm here to bring you the Nelson Reports August 2017 video exclusive. I'm here with Martha Stark, who is the Policy Director for Tax Equity Now New York and the former Commissioner of Finance. And today we're going to be talking about the inequality of the New York City property tax system, what Martha's coalition is doing about it. We're going to talk about, really get into how taxes are currently calculated, how they should be, and then the implications for both the residential and commercial space. So this is a much-watched topic that you all should learn about. So Martha, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this.
Thank you, James, for having me. It's great to be here, and it's an incredibly important topic, and it's a complicated one, so I'm happy to be able to share it with your viewers.
Wonderful. Well, tell us a little bit about your coalition.
Sure.
Why does it exist? Who does it consist of? And what is its mission?
Great. So Tax Equity Now New York was formed just earlier this year, and it's a group basically of homeowners, apartment building owners, all basically kinds of owners, co-op owners, condo owners, all of whom can't figure out New York City's property tax. And essentially this group came together because they feel like the system is broken. It's increasingly harder to understand, but more importantly, it's got some inequities that really need to be addressed. And so we came together, actually figured out that probably the best way to get changes would be to file a lawsuit. And part of the reason why we decided to do that is that for years, I mean, we're not the first ones to notice that the property tax system is broken. Elected officials, the speaker, the mayor, everyone has been, decrying how terrible the system is and difficult it is to explain, but yet not doing anything at all. And we feel like the court is an important tool and a mechanism for both saying what the inequities are and which ones need to be addressed, and then putting pressure or bringing pressure to bear to make sure something different happens.
Right. That certainly makes sense. So where does this suit stand right now, and what would it take for your group to prevail?
Good question. So we filed a lawsuit on April 25th, and the city, the suit was filed actually against the City of New York and the State of New York, and Mayor and the governor's offices. So actually the Department of Finance was sued, my former agency, the State Office of Real Property Tax Services, which is an agency within the State Department of Taxation and Finance, and then the City of New York, the State of New York. And we filed it on April 25th of this year. And just about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, the city and state actually filed a motion to dismiss the action. They filed that on July 7th. And we have until the end of August to respond to their motion to dismiss. We think the motion to dismiss was really not the way to go, given how many people have said that the system is broken. It's certainly a litigation tool that people are using, but we think we're probably going to survive the motion to dismiss. And then I guess we'll get to the place where they file an answer and we get to sort of discovery. It'll take a little while, but it's really important that it move forward.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about how properties are currently assessed, and then how would your group propose changing that?
Sure. So basically, Judge Lippman, who is a former, head of the Court of Appeals here in New York, he's a part of the litigation team. He's at Latham and Watkins, and he explains it pretty simply. And he says, essentially, the property tax is supposed to be based on market value, and that your taxes should bear some resemblance or some connection, some relationship to what your market value is. So in its simplest form, the city is supposed to estimate what market value is. We are actually in a system that has 4 different tax classes, lots of history about how that came to be that I don't want to sort of necessarily bore your readers with, but we have 4 different tax classes. First class is 1, 2, and 3 family homes. There's about 600,000 or so of them, maybe a little bit more. The second class is apartment buildings. So it's apartment buildings, rentals, co-ops, and condos. Class 3 is utility property, and then class 4 is commercial property. And what the legislature did back in 1981, which is how old this law is they created those 4 classes, and they had one rule. They said that all property within each class had to be uniform within that class. And what's interesting about that is that there is no uniformity. And uniformity is pretty straightforward concept, right? I mean, it actually has some technical ways that you calculate it, but I went to Catholic school. Uniform meant we all wore the same clothes. That's basically what it means. And so from a taxation perspective, it means that like properties should have like taxes. So if my house is worth $700,000, I should be paying the same tax as someone else who has a house that's worth $700,000. And that's not how this system works. In fact, we have, I'll send you some data, but we ran a chart where we said, like, let's take actually a bunch of properties that sold for $750,000 in 1 year. And in one instance, the tax was as low as $1,500. In another instance, it was as high as $20,000, and that's all sold for the same price. We did another sort of thing like, let's find find a bunch of properties that pay $4,300 in taxes, and the range of value for these properties was from $150,000 to a house that was $9 million. So there's absolutely no uniformity in the system. Second thing that I just want to sort of point out is that that's the homeowner class, right? We're talking about the homeowner class. Within the rental apartment building class, so if you have rentals, co-ops, and condos, there's another rule in the city that says co-ops and condos can't be valued based on their sales price. And instead, what you have to try to do is find a comparable rental property. So you have, Central Park West properties selling for $20, $30 million, and they're getting compared to a rental property. And because those properties were built, the co-ops and condos were built during rent regulation time, they're actually finding a rent-regulated apartment to compare them to. So there are many instances where the Department of Finance actually values the entire building for less than what one unit sells for in the building. And so that actually creates a huge problem in the apartment building class, because it means that rental buildings are actually subsidizing these high-valued co-ops and condos. So that's a sort of major issue. And then utility properties nobody cares about, but they should, because those taxes get passed on dollar for dollar to you, any of their taxes. And then the commercial class, also lots of sort of discrepancies there about how those are valued. So really it's a system no one understands, and it's a morass with inequities within classes, and then there are certainly some inequities between classes as well.
Wow, that's really unbelievable to think about all the implications. It seems like you've really landed on something that, for once, landlords and tenants can agree on, that
yes.
the taxes are too high now. And I know part of the suit also talks about the impact on minority neighborhoods and,
yes.
and how they have also faced an unfair amount of the tax burden. So how has that come to pass? So
it's a good question. It is. I used to say when I was finance commissioner, God, if people could take off the boxing gloves, that the landlords and tenants could really agree on this particular issue, which is that the amount of taxes that apartment buildings are paying is just really very high. There are some buildings, we were talking earlier about the Bronx, but people are paying 25, 30, 35% of their gross income for taxes alone. Don't we're not even talking about the mortgage and lighting and all that sort of stuff, just for taxes alone. And one of my mentors, who's no longer with us, used to say to me, if the taxes are more than 25% of gross, that is confiscatory. It's like you might as well just have
look up that
the
word.
city. Yes, absolutely.
It's
might
not
as well
good.
just have the city, in your, in your pocket with you, is what she used to say. And we now have taxes up at 30, 35% of gross. And so I think that sort of interesting how one then sort of deals with that. And your question, just repeat one part of your question.
So why is the impact worse in some neighborhoods?
Yes, absolutely. Good question. So within the homeowner class, again, I want to go class by class just because it is a classified system. In the homeowner class, it's because there are rules that limit how much assessments can increase each year. So those rules go something like assessments can't increase more than 6% a year. But if you're in a neighborhood where values are going up 10, 15% a year, Park Slope, where I live, I'm in a co-op in Park Slope, but still, Park Slope values have gone up a lot, but you might be in Canarsie or Brownsville, where I grew up, where values aren't going up that much. So the assessments are able to keep up in Brownsville and Canarsie, but not keep up in Park Slope. And as a result, that leads to places like Canarsie, Brownsville, paying a much higher effective tax rate than places like Park Slope. The same thing is true sort of, again, for rental properties. The city doesn't have a limit. There's no cap on how much they can raise taxes. And so they will raise your assessment consistent with, to some extent, your income going up. But that also has created disparities. And again, this notion of co-ops and condos not being valued based on sales price results in renters picking up that huge burden. I do tell this one kind of funny story about my co-op. I was out of misfortune, I was able to actually buy a co-op in 1984 in Park Slope. And I'll tell you, and the people in my building are going to get mad at me, but I bought it for $90,000 in 1984. The method that finance uses to value co-ops and condos, this year, my co-op value is $87,000.
Wow.
So the mechanism so understates the value of co-ops and condos. And actually, I'm going to be honest, my building's not the worst of it. I mean, literally, if you are on Fifth Avenue, Central Park West, those buildings are being valued at a small fraction of the value. And mine is now 90. I'm going to be honest. I mean, of course, it's worth a lot more than 90,000 33 years later. And finance's value has not yet caught my value.
Wow. Well, you heard it here on the Nelson Report. So, yes. Look, this is definitely a hot topic, yes. But I know our current mayor said that he's going to wait to address this into the future, and a lot of these issues like rent regulation. It's from a political standpoint, it's a lightning rod. Right. So it might very well take the court system to implement. So I want to talk to you just quickly a little bit about the commercial tax burden as well, and looking at taxation compared to other cities as well, because New York needs to remain competitive. Right. So Savills actually did a study where they showed that the average tax per square foot for office product in Manhattan was $16.40, whereas in San Francisco it was $5.75. And you had told me when we were speaking before that was because California has a cap. But when you look at all the CBDs nationwide, the average is also $6. So is there a good reason why New York City is almost triple? And don't forget that most of the taxation, certainly property taxes in office buildings, are pushed onto our tenants. So at what point do tenants start saying, you know what, enough's enough, I'm going to go elsewhere. Why am I paying triple for occupancy costs when I can go to other competitive markets where I can get a great workforce like San Francisco? So maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So on the commercial side, really interesting issues there, not just property tax, but the fact that in Manhattan there's also a commercial rent tax that gets paid by tenants and stuff. And it, sort of by way of background, that commercial rent tax was implemented when the city bumped up against its property tax limit. There is a cap on how much you can raise from the property tax, and they created this back in the 1960s. Some creative budget person.
Was that the 50%? Because I have heard that property taxes and transfer taxes are now 50%.
That's correct.
And that was I know the prior budget of $70 billion. Now we're going to $85 billion. So I don't even know if we can support that.
It's absolutely 50% of the city's tax revenue. And what I was going to say is that, and the amount that you can raise from the property tax is limited to, it's a complicated sort of average, but the bottom line is this year the city's levy is about $28 billion for the property tax alone, not transfer taxes, and the like. And so on the commercial, just to kind of answer your question about the commercial side, things to be concerned about. Certainly the commercial rent tax, as well as the property tax burden and how that gets passed on to tenants. What was interesting about the report that you shared with me is that, and it kind of answers your question a little bit, Manhattan's rents also, especially for the Midtown area, were at $100, which is also 2.5 to 3 times what the average was around the rest of the country. And so it's interesting to me, but if you look at the tax burden, yes, it's something to sort of be concerned about. But I think that what people believe is, Manhattan, I like San Francisco too, but Manhattan's a place kind of to be. And I think you raise legitimate concerns about what is the appropriate burden of taxes really for everybody. So, we said that tenants and landlords have something in rental properties. This is an issue that's true for all owners of property. It's true for homeowners, it's true for apartment building owners, and it's true for commercial. What is the appropriate amount of taxes that we think makes sense? And I think when Maria was here, Maria Doulis from the Citizens Budget Commission, she pointed out that in fact, New York City relies a lot less on property taxes than other places. And that's because we have a diverse range of taxes, from income taxes to actually corporate taxes, which most other local governments do not have. So, I think, yes, commercial owners are thinking exactly, as James, your question sort of suggests, like, where is the right place? Am I going to have a competitive edge if I'm somewhere else? And it's something for the city certainly to be mindful of.
Perfect. Well, you've given our audience a lot to think about today, so really appreciate your coming in and sharing with us all this information.
Great, James.
Wish you all
Thank
the
you
best.
so much for the
Thank
opportunity.
you.
Absolutely.
Sure thing.
Great.
Thank you.